did an oral history in Grand Lake, and the reason I asked you where you wanted me to look was I looked at the camera the whole time, and he said, "No, you're supposed to look at me."
Look at there. Okay, folks, I'm Dr. Tom Hamilton. We're here at the Bridge Street History Center in Granbury, Texas. We're fortunate this morning to get to do an interview with Sissy Wilson, a longtime resident of Granbury who has some very interesting background and stories. And our moderator today will be Mrs. Jean Kate, who's heavily involved in the Bridge Street History Center also, and a longtime Granbury resident. So this is October 24th, 2022, and a nice rainy day for once. So without further ado, I'll let Jean take over.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. I am personally delighted to be visiting with Sissy Wilson, and we will try to behave ourselves. I'm not too sure that's going to work out too well, because when she and I get to talking, one thing leads to another. So we're going to stay with the outline.
Yes.
Most of the time. Okay, Sissy, you and I share a lot of history as far as the Aston house is concerned, but tell us something about your family history. How long you've been in the Granbury area?
Well, we've been in Granbury since 1980, which is over 40 years, longest I've ever lived anywhere. And we moved with two small children, 4 and 2, into that wonderful house, which was a wonderful house, the Aston house, to raise children in. Kept your waistline small too, because it had a front staircase and a back staircase, and we were constantly doing this. You know, when the children realized there was a great way to get away from mama. You know.
Sissy, I have to ask you this. How did you come to buy the Aston house?
That I love this story. As only living with Bob Wilson, the adventures that we go on. We lived in Dallas, and we had been looking for an old home to restore. But in Dallas, the areas that had the old homes weren't really conducive to family living. Bob had been offered a job here in Granbury the year before, but he was contracted with Parkland and couldn't extract himself from that contract. So as the year progressed, he began thinking more and more about it, and he said, when I finish with this contract, let's go down and check Granbury out. And we did, but we didn't tell anybody we were coming, because if we didn't like it, we didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So we looked at the town, and on our way out, I looked down this street, and I saw this great big sign in front of a house, and I went, antique store, gotta be. And so we drove down, and it said, for sale. Now, granted, my parents are in Dallas watching the 2 children at that point. And we didn't have cell phones in those days, so we go find the realtor, and we go, we want to look at that house. We bought that house that day without even thinking about it. We were driving back to Dallas going, what have we done? And we realized if we had done it any other way, as responsible adults with 2 small children, we probably would not have done it. And we would have missed out on the greatest adventure of our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have always maintained, because the same thing happened to my husband and I. We were on our way. We stopped here for lunch. We were on our way to look at ranch property outside of Stephenville. And Joe Nutt said, do you like old houses? We never did get to Stephenville, and on the flight back to Illinois that night, Charlie said, how are we going to tell the kids we didn't buy a ranch? And I said, that's your job. That's the kid.
I love it.
Sissy and I had discussed this before and decided the Aston house picks its owners.
It does, yes.
And it was a wonderful place to raise kids.
It was.
And that's just your own kids. Chris Cheney, who is now one of our wonderful people here, and has his own business. Up and down the back stairs and the front stairs, and the whole time he'd be yelling, "Hey, Kate!" And he thought apparently that my name was Kate. But Mary said he drove her nuts. She was positive was going to get killed. But share some of your stories about living in the Aston house.
Oh, we finally embraced the fact that people think we're living in a museum. We're just the caretakers of the museum.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times that we would walk into the house and there were strangers in the house. And it's interesting how people react when you've caught them doing something they know they shouldn't do. They react one of two ways. It's either, "Oh, we're so sorry," or they become indignant. "Well, why didn't you have a lock on the door? Why wasn't there a sign?" And I thought, well, you had to step over roller skates and a big wheel, and, there's sort of an idea there's a family here. But in the years that we lived there, we met almost every family that had a history with the house, except Dolly and Andy.
Yeah.
But I think maybe we met Dolly a few times.
I'm positive
Yeah.
you did.
We, Jean and I share some of the same stories in the house, although we did not know it until Artist Fansteel did an interview. And when I started telling her some of the stories.
She asked me if I'd ever talked to you about it, and I said, "You've got to be kidding.
No.
I don't want anybody thinking that I,
Yeah.
gone
Well,
off the roof or something."
and that's interesting too. When you run into something that's unexplained, you're afraid to even tell your spouse because he's going to think I'm crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought the same thing. But the first night we were there, we had very little furniture because we were trying to sell the house in Dallas. And so we had a crib, a half a bunk bed, and a pull-out sofa. And outdoor furniture on the porch. And something woke us up in the middle of the night, and it sounded like an empty trash can being thrown against the wall and rolling. And Bob gets up, and the Dallas in him goes, "Where's my gun?" And I'm like, "Calm down." Nothing, not a thing to have caused that sound. No doors open, no windows, no nothing. Next night, it happened again. And it happened almost every night. And we thought, that's strange. Maybe there's something going on in this house we're unaware of. So we sort of calmed down, and things progressed in that house. Things would go missing and they'd show up again. And we were far too young to have memory loss then. Far too young. Maybe totally preoccupied raising two small children. But one day our daughter came in. She was young, and she asked me, "Who was that man that was sitting on my bench in my bedroom last night?" And I'm just like, "Oh my goodness, I don't know. Let's go talk to Daddy." And she said there was a man that didn't scare her, had a nice glow about him, and he just sat in the window seat, and then he wasn't there anymore. And because we'd had unusual events in the house, I didn't think she was making something up, but as a parent, you also wonder, how do I handle this? Oh, I don't know. Was it Santa Claus? But the most unusual event in that house was we had come to terms with it and sort of enjoyed it. It was just a novelty. Well, now I'll go back to Bob, though. Bob one night got up in the middle of the night to go to the restroom and heard singing. And Jennifer used to sing all the time when she was eating. She'd, Bob said, "Isn't that sweet?" Jennifer singing. And then the realization that he was alone in the house hit him. And I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to have seen him. He said, "I just gathered myself up, ran to the bedroom, and pulled the covers over my head." And fiddly-dee, I'll think about that tomorrow. But we were sharing those stories with friends, And this friend said, "That's not normal." And I said, "Well, I know that, I know that." He said, "No, you need to tell it to leave." And I said, "Well, what if I like having it around?" And he said, "You need to tell it to leave." And I went, "Okay." So one night when Bob was doing ER, and that's the only time I was uncomfortable, was when I was alone in the house. I thought, okay, I'm going to do what that person said, but with a caveat. I said, "You need to leave. If you mean us harm. If you don't mean us harm, you can stay as long as you want." And then I just fiddly-dee went to bed and fell asleep and didn't think anything more of it. And a couple of hours later, this knocking wakes me up from the next bedroom. It's like a den upstairs. And I think, darn, I've closed the cupboard door and the cat's in the cupboard. So I go in and the knocking gets louder, and I realize it's not coming from the cupboard. It's coming from the attic. And I think, this isn't good. So what does any good mother do with 2 children upstairs and there's a unknown knocking coming from the attic? I run downstairs, leave them alone. And I call Bob at the hospital. And he could hear over the phone the knocking. It got louder and louder and louder. And he got in the car and raced home. And by the time he got home, the knocking just sort of moved out the window upstairs and never again. And that one sort of made me realize that there's more to it than
There was.
And all of these almost all of these stories, but the knocking and the leaving, Jean and her family experienced as well.
It was so strange because when we moved after we left the Aston house, and I heard noise upstairs, and we didn't have an attic at that time, and I said, "Oh, don't tell me we've got squirrels up there." And Matthew, my youngest one, said, "I wonder if the lady followed us." And I said, "What lady?" And Jim said, "The one that checks on us all the time." And I said, "You've got a lady that checks on you?" "Yeah, she doesn't come in. She just looks in the door.
Peeks around the corner.
At both of us." And Eileen said, "Well, I wonder if the old man that sat on my toy chest came with us."
Same thing.
And so when Iris Fonsdale asked me, she said, "Have you ever talked to Sissy about this?" I said, I'm not crazy. I don't want anybody else to think that I am. Then Sissy and I got to talking, and the banging of the pots and pans or whatever. When I was home alone, when the kids were in school and Charlie was flying, I would hear footsteps upstairs. And I would go up either the front or the back stairs, and there was nobody there. I never saw the shadow.
I saw a shadow, yeah.
That's one thing. But I heard the footsteps, but didn't hear the shadow. But when we started comparing notes about it, we thought, there's more to this than we think. But one of the things that we decided, we came to the conclusion, we think it was Dolly Aston. Because Dolly Aston was known for being a very gracious hostess and very caring person and always very proper and very loving woman. And the funny part about it is, neither the kids nor myself, Charlie thought I was nuttier than fruitcake, it was never a frightening thing. It was kind of a warm, well, make yourself at home.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Now, excuse me, but I have to ask, did you ever have a professional ghost hunter, checker?
No, and now that you see them on TV all the time, it'd be awesome to have done that. But it wasn't as upfront in those days. People weren't talking about it as much.
Okay.
And it took me a long time to share with Bob that somebody kept peeking in my door. I'd enough that I'd get up and go look, because I thought, what child is out of bed at nap time? Yeah. But interesting, when we sold the house, The realtor went, I don't want to know anything, and don't say anything. And I'm like, okay. And but we buried the St. Joseph upside down, and he buried one in the front yard too. And I said, it was push me, pull me. So we didn't tell him. He said, don't tell me if don't want to know. And what was the first thing the new owner asked me?
What?
Please tell me there's a ghost. And
Oh.
I went, you know,
Welcome to the Aston house.
you'll find out sooner or later, you know.
Well, the thing
you're
was so
one that-
strange. We opened the attic. It had never been opened before. And the only thing that was up there was a glass doorknob. And we had it floored and had plumbing put in to do a bathroom up there so the kids would have a playroom. They wouldn't go up there. You
Oh,
couldn't
wow.
pay them to go
Really?
up there. They would crawl under the house on the dirt floor in the basement, but they would not go upstairs.
Interesting. Yeah. But, you know, you've triggered something about the attic that I love to hear in town, too. Bob, with my parents, we inherited these large Anna Lee Mr. and Mrs. Santa dolls. And he put them every Christmas up in the
Those
window
wonderful,
in the
wonderful
attic.
windows.
And that's, the kids would drive by, and their adult people now would say to Bob, we always remember driving past to see where Mr. and Mrs. Santa lived, up there in that little window. And
My kids wouldn't go up there. Isn't that wild?
yeah.
Where are the children now?
Oh, they're in Denver. We did such a good job in teaching them that's the home of our heart, where our family really began, that they're both in Denver. They're in their 40s. And how that can be, I don't know, since I'm only 39.
I'm just 10 years older than you at 49.
They make honest people out of us.
Tell us a little about your family background.
You know, I grew up in a very matriarchal family with a great-grandmother. And we were all like, we were on one street, grandparents here and great-grandmother here. So I was a bicycle ride away whenever I decided to run away from home, which was quite often because I was feisty. I guess I still am. But,
You are.
You know,
Definitely.
my great-grandmother was a fascinating woman, a woman of substance in a man's world who got things done in a very genteel, gracious way. She always said to me, Sissy, no matter what you do, make sure you do it with grace and dignity. And I loved that woman. She was my safe harbor. She was involved in missionary work. She built missionaries all over the world. And she knew how to keep me quiet in church because she always had lollipops, paper, and pen in her purse. And that she had her own pew. Everyone knew that's where Grace Snyder was. Grace Duff Snyder. She came from Lancaster, Pennsylvania in a covered wagon and settled in Missouri and then Kansas and then came down with my poppy. I never knew my great-grandfather. He passed away before I was born. But he began at a bank, sweeping the floors, and ended up owning the bank. So he was the American dream. But now my great-grandmother's parents and mother, her father took mule trains to Utah and supplies for the Mormons, and then would come back with all his saddlebags filled with gold. When he was gone, my great-great-grandmother, who I never met, had to close the barn door during snowstorms, and she raised the children, and they all went to school in a one-room schoolhouse, but she made sure that her daughters knew that they could become something. Yes, if they were willing to roll their sleeves up and try. And
That was in Pennsylvania
that was once they got to Kansas.
and Kansas.
Kansas, yes.
Now, whenever your family first came from Kansas or Missouri to Texas, where did they settle?
They settled in Wichita Falls, which when you think you could go anywhere, why Wichita Falls? But it was probably the closest thing, straight shot down,
Yeah.
from Kansas down through Oklahoma. And I just was at my husband's 55th high school reunion, and they're shutting down our old high school there and building 2 new ones. And I didn't have the heart to go back, because when I went back, my great-grandmother gave the library there. So it was called Snyder Library, and there was a portrait of her there. And the last time I went, it was just the library. And I didn't have the heart to go back and see that. But I do need to see if I can find her portrait, although it was the worst portrait I've ever seen.
But the women in your family were very strong for education.
Very strong, yes. Very. Now, my grandmother was, she was more a socialite, but, she was spoiled rotten, because my grandfather had his own train car, and the year before she got married, they hired a French maid to come take care of her, and she didn't even have to turn the water on in her bathtub. So Gaga was just a tad bit spoiled, I think. But and then my mother it's like generation skipping. My grandmother snorted like I do, so I picked that up from her. But my mother was very instrumental in establishing a museum in Wichita Falls, and the Junior League. She helped bring that into Wichita Falls, and she was a very quiet, strong, behind-the-scenes woman who got things done. And so I came from a long line of women who believed that a community is only as good as those willing to roll their sleeves up and participate. And so I knew what was expected of me. And it wasn't a negative that it was expected of me. It was just the way I was raised.
It's positives.
Yeah. But then there was my daddy, who was... Mama was the disciplinarian, and my daddy was the kindest, big heart. He needed to be in Texas. Yeah. But he was the one that taught me that when I went away to school and chose a city to go to, I went to Washington, D.C., to go to school. And I learned there's no R in Washington. But he loved people. People loved him. He was, when my ringtone went off, it's Glenn Miller, In the Mood. His daddy he went to Miami of Ohio, and he played in a big band in college. He played the saxophone. And every night at dinner, he had Glenn Miller playing in the background, and we used to gig him, Glenn who, Daddy? Glenn who? And you always knew Daddy was bringing home people after a party because the saxophone came out. Our beds would be covered with coats, and the saxophone would be playing. And Daddy was one who, his favorite musical was Brigadoon. And I equate a lot of life to Brigadoon. There are instances where you can see someone you haven't seen in 30 years, and it's just like it's the next day. And Brigadoon is that, But Daddy saw Brigadoon in New York with Mama, and he went backstage, and he invited the whole cast to go across the street to the bar, and drinks were on him. And this was just my daddy. I would not think to barge in backstage and invite a whole crew to come have drinks, But he was in broadcasting, actually radio in the beginning. But my grandfather started the radio. He was a pioneer in radio. And because of his knowledge in radio during World War II, he was drafted. And he wasn't a young man. He had a teenage gal. My mother was at Hockaday, and I don't know where my uncle was. He was younger. And he was drafted into a top secret mission on radar in England for D-Day. And my grandmother didn't know. All of her letters that came home were redacted. You know, they marked everything out that gave any idea of where he was. And to throw matters off and confuse them even more, they moved them to San Francisco for training. So she hadn't a clue where he was, you know. And but he was the one that started the radio station. And Daddy was down, I believe, in Beaumont at that point. And that's where I was conceived, so I'm a Beaumont baby. But they moved into television, and Daddy had a wonderful children's show called the Uncle Howdy's House Party, and everybody my age would go to see some of the photos and to see how kids dressed up in those days. I mean, I had the petticoats, and you know, the boys were in suits with little bow ties, and they all went to see Uncle Howdy. And to this day, Carol Hughes lives here in Granbury, and she will, every time I see her, go, Uncle Howdy's daughter. You know? So it was nice to be the daughter of a very famous man.
When did the show stop broadcasting?
You know, I couldn't give you a date because I was still young myself. But by the time I was in 4th grade, I don't believe he was doing it. So, you know, he...
we went to junior college in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
and you were there during a very turbulent time in our history.
I actually went away first at 14 all the women in my family were given the opportunity to go away to school, to broaden our horizons with the promise we'd come home. And they thought I'd go to Dallas, where Mama went. But being the first down the pike, they learned from me that it's not, you just can't assume anything. And my mother had gone to Chevy Chase Junior College. And up in that area, everything was, all the major colleges were single sex, and they were all male, like University of Virginia, Washington and Lee, Annapolis. And that's how some of these junior colleges popped up. 2 years, girls can go away and then come on back home again and get the feel of. And my aunt had gone to Mount Vernon. And I just said, I want to go to Washington. And so at 14, Mom and Dad put me on a plane by myself, and I flew all the way up to Washington, where a chaperone met me, Mrs. Howard. And some of the most fascinating years of my life were spent at that school. And it probably saved me from a turbulent time, because my generation was beginning to buck the establishment. And my rules in prep school were tighter than my rules at home. So when I came home and Mom and Dad said you need to be in at 10 o'clock, I'd go, no problem, no problem. Whereas other kids were push me, pull me with their parents. But, and I went to school with fascinating girls. One, Allie Laird, her father was Secretary of Defense. And Kim Watson, her father was first liaison with the right-hand man of LBJ, and then he went on to be Postmaster General. So the school was filled with amazing families, but they were so natural and normal. And that made me realize, the kind of challenges they live through when people think that they must be extraordinarily different, and they're not. They're just like you and me. But I was there in April of 1968 when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I really like to think that that's the day our innocence died, because we were all getting ready for spring break and sitting in front of illegal sun lamps, and we watched D.C. burn. They could not get us out. My parents could not get me out. The curfews were so tight, and the bridges were being taken over, and I was. Some girls were able to get out, but there was something so frighteningly moving about looking out our window and seeing the smoke billowing from downtown D.C., and then going down to the rec room and watching it in black and white and seeing the riots and the unrest. And then the National Guard came in using our street. And we were just all these cute boys going down. You know? Anything to try to avoid realizing the danger we were in. Because things were stretched thin in D.C. at that point. But we watched the National Guard come in, and And the beauty of being up there as a girl from Texas is I got to go to the White House a lot because Lady Bird always took care of the Texas girls.
Oh, darn.
And we had teas, and we got to go to symphonies there, and met LBJ, and he was larger than life, absolutely larger than life. She was such a genteel. And they always made me mimic her. To plant a tree, a bush, or a shrub, I'm going to beautify America. Said, talk to us, Sissy.
Well, now, did you always plan to come back to Dallas, to SMU?
Yes, because my grandmother went there, my mother went there, my great-grandparents donated a dorm there. So I was destined. And I really didn't want to because Mount Vernon Junior College was going 4 years and I could have stayed. And I loved D.C. Just absolutely loved that town. But I had made a promise to come home. And I'm really glad I did because within an hour of my arrival at the dorm, Bob was at my door. Yeah. We'd known each other since I was 14, but parents got in the way there. You know, isn't he a nice young man? Kiss of death. Isn't she a perfect little girl? Kiss of death. You know, but once we got to SMU, and I can tell you what he was wearing, and that was over 52 years ago. You know, he had a black velour pullover with a little zipper just pulled down a little bit, Ray-Ban glasses. And that was it, you know. Awesome. He said, I should have worn those sunglasses a lot sooner.
I love it.
Yeah.
But then you two married.
Yes.
And then decided to discover Granbury.
Yes.
We're delighted that you discovered Granbury.
Oh, we are too.
And as we said earlier, the Aston house picks its owners. There are two couples that had no intentions of buying a house here, didn't leave this town without buying one.
Yeah.
And wouldn't have looked back on that for anything because it led us both into doing a lot of things in the community.
The thing about Granbury is it's willing to let you try anything you want as long as you're willing to roll your sleeves up.
That's it.
Yeah.
Get in, get busy, and get it done.
Yeah.
And I had to laugh because there was a woman that she was down. I was judging beans.
You were the bean queen. I always wanted to be the bean queen.
Oh, I got the green drug. I'm the first one. I said, "What are the qualifications?" And they said, "A sense of humor." And I said, "Got you covered." But this woman, she had 3 basset hounds, and so I thought, I'm a dog person, so I'm going to go look at these dogs. And so I excused myself from the table, and I went over and I'm playing with them. And they said, you know, we've traveled all over this country, and we've met friendly people wherever we've been. But the friendly in Granbury is totally different, and it is. There is something about Granbury. Charlie used to walk down to the nut house to have lunch or whatever with Joe Nutt all the time. And there was a stray dog that would follow him down, ugliest dog you ever saw, would sit by Charlie and just look out at him adoringly. The kids call them, I forget what the kids call them, I call them horrible. But you talk to people. There's something in Granbury. Either you had it when you get it once you get here, or you had a little bit before you got here. And the people that move here, they seem to feed on that. And the couple from California with the 3 dogs, they said, we're going back to California to sell our house and we're moving back here. And I thought, oh my, okay. And they now own a house 3 houses down from the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. They kept their word. They came back. But the friendly in Granbury is different.
This was the most welcoming place. You know, when you think about, and it blew my mind. In the 80s, this was a mover or shaker place. I mean, Janine Macon, you'd Harold Robbins, and I mean, you know, Larry McMurdy was here all the time, and I was just going, holy. And, you know, we were in the centerfold of the Sunday paper when Candace Manroe did an article, Gone to Granbury.
Yep.
And she interviewed all the people who'd moved from Dallas and were here, and it was an amazing place. And I remember being at a function in Dallas, and somebody said, well, where do you live? And I went, Granbury. And he goes, oh, we hear big things about Granbury. Yeah.
And people did things back then, as you did. Were you the first woman that ran for city council?
I think that Linda Powell's mother may have. I'm not sure, but somehow she was. No, there was Jean Robertson.
Oh, yeah, that's true, and she was very active. But the thing was, people that came here and lived here were encouraged to do things. And someone asked me one time when we started the 4th of July and the Art Association and the Soccer Association, they said, who did you go to get permission to do all these things? And we just looked at each other and said,
Just did
we didn't
it.
ask permission, we just did it. And you came in that era where if you wanted it done, you did it.
You did it, yeah. And, you know, I remember the day that David Southern said, can I come over and talk to you? And I thought, okay. I have never been busier than I was in this town. I mean, was it Peggy Wallace?
Yeah,
Wallace.
Peggy Wallace.
She told me,
Yeah.
you are going to have to learn to say no in this town because you will be worked. And I was on all those committees doing everything. And David Southern came and asked me if I'd run for city council. And I thought, me? You know, never crossed my mind. But that's where I've been going all the time to ask for permission for things, was to get clearance from the council. And there again, there's Granbury. If you're willing to try, they'll let you, you know, and if you trip up and fall, they'll help you brush your knees off and get up and try again. And I mean, that began 15 years of my life. And I ended up being the first woman acting mayor when David left town. Scared everybody to Sam Cullum and just, you can't do that. Yeah. I said, I bet I can. I bet the water's on tomorrow and the lights are on. And, you know, and he said, wow. And I said, because I delegate. I know there are people that do that for a living. You know, that's their job and they do it well. You know, I don't get down in the trenches and fix the
How
pipe.
long were you the official mayor?
The official mayor, 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah, and I learned. I kept going, how's David do all of this? It just streamlined and it's so perfect. And I thought, how am I going to run my first meeting? And then I looked at my agenda and I went, oh, I'll just read what the agenda says. You know? And that was just easy peasy. And
the rest is history.
But I never understood. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say aye. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. You know, it needs to be nay. You know? But and those were 15 years that I cherish, even though some of them were tough. And Sometimes I'd come home spitting mad. Yeah. And David and I would cool off on the porch, either his porch or my porch. Yeah. Because there were some turbulent times in this little town, too.
There were.
Politically. And we just knew to let off steam.
But you kept on going, and that's the important part.
Yeah. I really enjoyed it. I think we were there at a very special time when people could work together without politics being so involved. We were all there for the right reason. Yeah, we were just making $30 a month, so it wasn't the money.
Of course, were you on council the year that the mayor at that time, whose name shall remain nameless at this particular moment, big headlines in the newspaper that he was going to annex the power plant? We thought, you can't do that. It's in another county. You can't annex them.
No.
That was hysterical. But you were here during some of the most fascinating times of Granbury. And people, you're right about one thing. We had ideas, and we were allowed to do it. And people just stepped back and got out of our way and let us do it.
Yeah.
Which was wonderful.
Yeah.
You've received many awards, all more than well deserved. But you got a very special award from the Chamber of Commerce.
I was so touched with that award, and it was so unexpected. To have my peers acknowledge a job that I did because I loved it, and that my job benefited the welfare of the people of Hood County. Just to this day, I'm speechless over it. I was very speechless that night. Bob said they found a way to shut you up. Yeah. But in addition to that award came a Senate, beautifully framed. It's on. I walk past all three of those awards every day, and it just validates a time spent here.
Now tell us what each one of those three awards.
Oh, I should have brought them. I knew you'd. I love what they say.
Okay.
But I couldn't tell you right now.
Sorry.
But because they brag about me. And I look at them going, I was just doing what I thought was right.
Yeah.
And to have my community acknowledge. And with all the people that do so much, to have it recognized on my way out. Yeah.
Well, and the one thing that they should all realize when they look at that is you were having fun.
Most of the time.
That, to me, has always been the big deal.
Yeah. Oh, I did have fun with some of those Dallas upstarts that would come in and their gold nuggets just hanging off of them and their full-length raccoon coat. And then they go, "Don't you worry, little lady." And I'd go, "Oh, I'm not going to." It maddened me that they had, number one, such a preconceived idea of small town people and small town women as well. So I just, instead of getting mad, I got even.
I love it. And that's very typical of you, my friend.
Yeah, I just would ask questions.
Yes.
Till they painted themselves in a corner. And I, to this day, don't know how I did that, but...
One thing that I have got to ask you about is your photography.
Oh.
Sissy, I've seen so much of your work, and of course you just recently won an award for one of the most incredible photographs I've ever seen of Sam Elliott.
Oh,
it
I love
just
that.
touched me deeply. But your camera took you around the world.
You
How
know,
did you start out with it?
I was scared to death of cameras. And...
I can't put you scared of anything.
Oh, cameras. Well, they require numbers, and I don't like numbers. I'm the one they introduced pie charts. at the council during, budget time. So I understand a piece of pie. But when I was diagnosed with MS, I could no longer be the athlete I was. And that's where I hung my hat. That's where I found my confidence in myself. I was competitive water skier, equestrian, I played tennis. None of it I did well, but I did it all and loved it. I couldn't do that anymore. And I didn't have a substitute. And Jennifer and Bob were the photographers. And they gave me this little bitty elfin camera. I could just put it in my pocket. And it didn't scare me because you could just dial in what you wanted and take it. And I remember the first picture I took and I went, oh, that looks sort of nice. A little artsy there. And Bob realized that I had an eye for it. I still didn't want to do anything with it, but just that little elfin was just fine, thank you very much. And he surprised me one Christmas with a total immersion, week-long program in Fredericksburg. And I cried the first day when they sent us out after 2 hours in the classroom. It was meant for beginners, and there were about 15 people in the class, and there was one beginner, me. So they revised the curriculum of the class to match the greatest number of people, and I was lost. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. To make matters worse, she'd go, and then there's Sissy. And that was probably the greatest gift she gave me because I bristled. I said, I'm going to show this woman. So that was my beginning, which was bumpy. But in Colorado, every morning in the summer, I'd take my camera down to the end of the dock and wait during civil twilight when the sky is just coming to life and the colors are magnificent if you've got clouds. And no two mornings are alike. And that's where I discovered my gift and my passion was during the sunrise period of time. And then I branched out and began to take pictures of anything and everything. My camera, Lola, goes everywhere with me. Whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. And now I am a Fort Worth camera ambassador, along with a National Geographic photographer. I mean, professional photographers, and I still can't believe it. But I love it because, I used to write for a magazine here in town, a little Granbury journal.
Yeah.
And I had to give that up when I got MS because I can't always think of words. But I can say more with one photo than I could 1,000 words in an article. And the story's different with each person that views the photo because they see their own story in the photo.
Well, and so many of your pieces are in private collections.
Across the nation, and it blows my mind, And then I've got my wall of shame, which is all the ones that I love that don't sell. And we've got one long wall that one of those great big long foosball tables used to be on, and the previous owners, and it's just solid. And Bob says, "Can I put one up too?" And I'm like, "Up there." But I love it. I've now been published in an online magazine as one of their featured photographers.
Oh, wow.
And there are over 55,000 international photographers in this group. And she selected me as one of her featured photographers. So it's still so surprising to me that I just embrace every little award that comes as something that is unbelievable to me.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. But I don't go out and market myself. I don't want to be in business. I love it too much to get bogged down and have to do numbers.
Didn't some female person in your family have kind of an eye for art?
My great-grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish for her these days, because when I was little, she'd take me, sit me down. She had, I can smell the turpentine now. She was an oil painter, and she'd sit me down and she'd be working on a canvas, and she'd try to teach me about light and composition, and I'd be looking out that window going, there's a tree to climb, there's baseball to play. But now I realize it's stuck because I naturally compose things and look at it and go, now how do I know to do that? And then I go, God, good grace.
Your landscapes are magnificent. They are.
Thank you. I've just begun dabbling in people, but I don't like taking photos of people. I've studied under Peter Hurley, who's a headshot, internationally known headshot photographer. But I can't, I don't know why I have more trouble with people if they know I'm taking their photo.
Yeah.
If they don't know I'm taking it, I can do
Now,
it.
the one that you took of Sam Elliott, how did you come across being able to get that shot?
I was on the corner of the square waiting as all other 70-year-old women were, and he walks out and we all just go, oh, Sam! But that is just a normal photo. He was walking towards the corner, and there were people in front of him, there were people behind him, but I noticed the tilt of his head. He was looking down, and I went, that's my shot. So I took what little I've learned about post-processing, and then I went to Google and YouTube and found other training tutorials on how you can take something out of a photo and create something new. And so I just took his head looking down and took everything else out of the photo, so the background is black, and all you see is the hat, the mustache, and that pink scarf he wore in 1883. And it's one of those moments I looked at it and I went, oh my goodness, this is my shot forever. For absolute forever, ever.
And it's the same thing, I think, for the people who have seen it, because I've seen it multiple times, and it's incredible.
And I want to get it to him, but I don't know how to. I've tried every little aspect, short of joining. His agent says, well, if you join this and you become a member, then you can have access. And I'm going, nah, I don't know about that. So, but I want him to have it.
Well, we're thrilled to death that you saw a sign you thought was for an antique store and ended up with a house and became a whole new chapter in Granbury history.
My life in Granbury has been absolutely, amazing. I don't want to overuse a word, but this little town let me try anything and everything I wanted.
You hit it perfectly, Sissy.
Yeah.
Granbury lets you be yourself.
Yes. And that was the beauty of moving here as well. It's the first time in our lives that we weren't somebody's daughter, granddaughter, great-granddaughter, son, and you never really knew, have I achieved these things because I'm me or because I'm somebody's granddaughter or great-granddaughter? And here in Granbury, you achieve it because you roll your sleeves up and you do it.
That's right.
And,
Well, ladies, I appreciate y'all so much. Y'all have done a fantastic job today, and this will be a great addition to the Bridge Street History Center's collection of oral histories. So I want to thank you both very much.
I love what you're doing here.
Oh,
Thank you.
So much so.
it's a pleasure.
Thank you.